You have to go to like a Home Depot or something to get that. And you sort of mix up a bucket of this stuff, as I said, quite thick. Pour it into the head. It's called durable on 90 because it sets after 90 minutes. Like after 90 minutes, it'll be solid. Even after that, I would wait like 6 to 12 hours, even overnight or whatever, before taking the bandages off. And then once the bandages are off, and you peel them off carefully, odds are you're not going to be able to save the bandage shell and make another copy. If you're really careful, you might be able to get it off solidly, but probably not. Even if you like properly greased the inside of the shell. So then you end up with this thing. Once you've got this, then you start sculpting your forehead. What time do I have to talk before going into this? We're already halfway through, so we gotta get started on our front. So very important thing. Remember to A, grease the edge so we can get this thing off of him, and B, grease the eyebrows and eyelashes and so on so that he doesn't lose any of that in the process.
It looks like it's hard.
Yeah, it's quite solid on the back, and I can actually feel a little bit of warmth coming off of it. Yeah, he's had it done, obviously, so yeah. He knows what it's about. I've had several of these casts made of myself. Well, I made one of my own, and then I've had several of other people doing it to me. The old joke in our club is like, come over to my place and get plastered. There we go. Adamcha.
As the punny, you should be punished.
I consider myself a pundit. I should be sent to the penitentiary.
You gotta remember these, Dad.
That wasn't perfect at all. It was catastrophic.
In my circle of people, they would shoot me.
I'm an incorrigible punster. Do not encourage.
Got.
Yeah.
But are you
Okay.
the penultimate class?
Eyebrows.
Eyebrows.
Yeah, see, I almost
I'd like them back,
Yes.
please.
No, there have been a couple of times where I almost started laying the front on without putting the grease around the edge. There's also a couple of times where I almost covered over the person's nostrils before realizing what I was doing.
Did you do his sideburns?
I did the sideburns when I did the back half, but I'll put a little bit more on now just to be sure.
Thank you.
And even just a little bit on, like for guys who got a little bit of facial hair, not necessarily a bad idea to just slap a little bit on there. I have done casts of guys with beards, and generally what you want to do is take some something like painter's tape or some kind of tape that is not too sticky, and just cover the beard hair, the facial hair with the tape. And you can do that to the sideburns too. Sometimes if the cap is too small and wants to sort of creep off, I tape down the sides of it, and that also helps cover the sideburns. But obviously you want a kind of tape that's not going to itself take the person's hair off. Fortunately, Gordon has fairly pale eyebrows, so if he actually loses some of it, it won't show that much.
No.
I am, of course, kidding.
Of course.
For example, when he reads the tube there and you find out that it's actually stick for
Yeah,
paper.
yeah, it's like, oh wait, this is glue stick. All right, that should be fine. All right. Okay, I'm going to do his eyelashes now so that I don't forget. Like, ideally you would want to sort of like leave the eyelashes until you're actually ready to cover the eyes so that he can actually keep his eyes open. But this stuff is fairly thick and not too like, it should sort of stay where it's put, so hopefully I can grease his eyelashes and you can still probably open your eyes and not have it feel too gunky. All right, I think we're good to go for the front half. To sort of keep up our pace here. Okay, I'm gonna have to kind of work with my back to you guys a little bit here. Okay, so again, folding it lengthwise in half so we get a good solid edge and laying it over the edge of the other half. And overlapping them so we get good solid. I have done this on people where I left the ears exposed and I actually worked around the ear and tried to mold the ear itself. It can be done. It's tricky and it doesn't always work all that well. More often than not, when I make the final copy and tried to take the bandages off, the ears broke off with the bandage. So it hasn't been all that successful. Doing it with alginate is a lot easier. Or if you really need a mold of your ear, like you're actually making a pair of Vulcan ears or something, I would recommend just lay on one side, have the person just do the bandaging of the back of the ear with a seam along the edge of the ear and then the front of the ear. Make it a separate piece rather than trying to make it part of the head. Because then it's a lot easier to work with. And I've done that as well. I've actually taken molds of the ear. That's where alginate really comes into play. Because alginate is really good for doing like weird odd shapes and details and stuff because it bends enough to sort of get out of all the cracks of the ear. While we're going in and talk about, I guess, the rest of the process. Sculpting, soaking your clay. You basically, you want to, if you read anything that Michael Westmore wrote about how he designed the Klingons, he's written all kinds of stuff about how he, based it on dinosaur bones and you want it to look organic. One important thing is you want it to be more or less symmetrical because human faces are more or less symmetrical, Klingon faces are more or less symmetrical. So you want the main ridge to go up the middle of the face and not sort of off to one side. That's another thing that I accidentally did with my first Klingon head project was I got it mostly sculpted and then realized that the ridge, as it went up my head, sort of ended up about an inch off of center by the time I got all the way to the top. So yeah, you don't want to do that.
What's something you can do to ensure symmetry during your mold?
You really sort of have to look at it. You have to eye it. You can sort of feel it, like with your two hands. Like, does it feel the same on this side as it does on that side? You sometimes have to be a little bit careful about the source of your light. Like if you're working in a place where the light is all coming from one side, then it can be hard to sort of judge symmetry.
Because your shadows.
Your shadows, exactly right. Yeah. So you sort of like have to turn it around so that it gets light from both, so that you can sort of see it from both sides and make sure that you are being somewhat symmetrical. Like a few minor, you don't have to freak out too much about it because all human faces are a little bit asymmetrical. But in general, you want it to be, as symmetrical as you can. If there's a ridge going up here, you want a ridge going up here, and not like all the way down here or whatever. What I like to do for the design of the sculpt is we've got a bunch of our members are actually part of the Klingon Justice League, so we're mash-up characters of Klingons with, Superman, Batman, and so on.
That's cool.
So yeah, thank you. So what I actually did is I designed them so that their head ridges were reminiscent of their logos. So if you, I'm not sure if you can see it from that distance, but the Superman, his ridges are actually in two S's on an S on either side of his head, like a forward S and a mirrored S on the other side. I'm currently working on making a new forehead for myself that would have sort of a stylized bat-shaped ridge.
I want to see your Green Lantern one.
Unfortunately, I can show you the sketches of all these characters at our table downstairs. Unfortunately, I couldn't find Green Lantern's forehead when I was packing for this convention. I just moved, so all of my stuff is all over the place, unfortunately. I really would have liked to have brought the Green Lantern head, partly because It's got the same color makeup on it as one of our other members who doesn't have a head yet, so I was going to lend it to her to wear for this weekend, but I couldn't find it, so she had to go without. But that's okay.
Can I ask your process in painting the prosthetic as well?
Sure, we're jumping forward, but that's okay.
Oh, no, I don't want to jump too much forward.
That's okay. Well, so yeah, basically, so sculpting process, you try and sort of think of all of these things. Ideally, you want to try and avoid too many undercuts. Everybody know what an undercut is?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, basically, if you sculpt something, like, because you're going to be molding it, and if the mold sort of reaches around and catches on something that it can't pull off, that's an undercut. Now, because what you're working in is plasticine, it's called, if you go to an art store, it's called plastilina. It's basically plasticine, and it's a good product for, like, it doesn't harden, so you can actually, like, sort of put it aside and come back to it. Like, if you leave it sitting for months, it will eventually dry out, but otherwise you can just sort of come back to it and sculpt it as you go, and get it to, so that's what I use for this process. But where was I? I don't remember where the beginning of that sentence was. You're doing good? Okay, good. Yeah, we're going to start to sort of move down onto his face a little bit, so important to make sure that he's comfortable. At a certain point, he starts to look like a nun in a wimple.
How do you solve a problem?
Like Marie, yeah, exactly. By the way, it's seriously, one of the things you don't want to do too much is when you get to this stage, you don't want to intentionally try and make the person laugh, because you don't want them to change the expression on their face during this process. They should be trying to hold a very neutral expression. So I'm just going to try and get underneath the throat here a little bit. Sorry, you can't see this, but I need to be able to see what I'm doing. I wasn't talking in words. Can I get a time check from somebody?
We're looking at 59.
59? Okay. Well, we got like 15 minutes, which we'll see how we do here. Okay, yes. So let's just try and go in order. So we've done our sculpt, trying to avoid undercuts. Because the plastilina is soft enough to actually bend a little bit or give way, undercuts aren't as much of an issue, but oftentimes what I'll do is once I've got my sculpt and I've poured the negative over it and it's dried and I'm ready to take it off, I will put the entire thing into a warm oven, just at like 150 degrees or so, just warm enough so that softens up the plastilina a little bit, and then I try and pull it off. Because at the beginning, it'll have a bit of a vacuum seal, so it won't want to pop. And also, if there are any undercuts, then those undercuts are going to have to shift in the sculpt. Like the clay will have to, come off or bend or whatever in order to release your negative. So warming it up actually helps with that process. This is something that I found. So then you got your negative off. You pour, you start putting, and then you grease. You got your negative. You spread Vaseline on the inside of that to grease it. Actually, wait. Well, you would have greased the outside of the sculpt before you put the plaster negative on. So usually you don't have to actually put grease on the plaster negative before starting to put on the latex, because the latex doesn't really want to stick to the plaster. Oftentimes what I've found is like the first time I put the latex into one of these molds, it will come off fairly nicely because there's a little bit of plaster dust residue in there. After that, it tends to stick a little more. So rather than greasing it, actually what you should be doing is powdering it. I misspoke earlier. So you just brush a little bit of powder on it, blow out the excess.
Are we talking baby powder, like
yeah,
a translucent makeup powder?
Yeah, something like that. Something like that should work fine. Okay. Basically, it's just so that the latex releases. And that's the other thing, is once you actually get the latex, this raw latex piece out of your mold, you want to powder it on both sides because latex will stick to itself otherwise, and then you're going to end up with a ball of useless latex. So then you end up with that raw rubber thing. You're going to want to trim it to shape, like, put it on the person's face and see where you want it to end and trim it to shape. And then we get to the painting part. Okay, this is where the actual question was. Probably the best thing to do, and it's something that I've been quite lazy about and not done, is use some sort of latex-based paint, or acrylics or whatever, and paint it, or actually mix paint in with the latex as you're pouring it in with a mold is the ideal. At least for the layer, right? The layer that's going to be right on the outside. I usually just use makeup. Now, makeup doesn't really stick very well to latex, so you'll often have to reapply it or apply a lot of layers. It sometimes, to a certain extent, depends on what colors you're using, because you see what color that raw piece is. That's the raw latex after it's sort of sat for a while, like a few weeks or whatever. When it originally comes off, it's very